We've been in this series looking at this question of what it is to live wisely, and we've looked at a few different aspects of it. This doesn't look terribly complicated, but there we go. We've looked at a few different aspects of life and how we might live, and last week we were considering the question of what's the role of spiritual disciplines in our life, and we talked about a few different ones there. And I said that one of the disciplines that we could look at is this Sabbath, the rhythm of Sabbath and rest. And so we're going to take 2 weeks to look at Sabbath. And as I've prepared this week, it's become abundantly clear to me that we could have looked at this for 20 weeks, and I still wouldn't have scraped the surface of this subject. And the thing is, when I get up to teach, sometimes I have the joy of being able to teach something that I have figured out, something I've learned in my life, something that is from me through the work that God has done in my life. And sometimes I get up and I talk about stuff I've read and I've come to understand. And then occasionally you have to get up here as a preacher to speak about something that you realize you really don't know very much about at all. And Sabbath is one of those. I confess that I am a learner among us today. I am not someone standing up here saying, I have all the answers to this. I've become convinced it's profoundly important, but I am definitely more of a failure in this space than a succeeder. And I just want to be honest about that, not least because many of you have seen my life and go, how does this work, Glenn? And so we want to walk in the honesty of that, but also recognize that this is an important subject. And this week we're going to kind of look at what is Sabbath. So if you're a visitor, you're only going to get part one of the two-parters. That we're really going to ask the big picture, what is Sabbath, how does it work? And then next week we're going to spend the time looking at, well, how is it, if that's true, might we live that way? What would it look like today to live out Sabbath? Because I'm convinced that it matters. The culture that we live in, the culture we find ourselves in, is one that I think Sabbath comes in conflict with. You see, life for nearly everyone is busy, right? Is there anyone who doesn't feel busy at all? No. Life makes us weary, right? Is there anyone in here who isn't at some level quite tired? Yeah, and the only ones that won't put their hand up for that, like you're too tired to lift your hand, haven't you? That's the... Life is intrusive, right? We carry these phones around with us. It doesn't matter where we are, we can be got at. You know, somebody can reach us. We're always able to be contacted. Life is fast. Like it happens. Friends, it's the 16th of February. Like, how did we get here? I follow this little account on social media, and every day it comes up with a little bar. It says the year is this much completed. And the other day I saw the year is 12% completed. I'm like, no, too much. Life is fast. If you've got kids, then you know, like, you go from one week to the next, and suddenly you're like, where did that week go? We've just been at pace everywhere. And with everything that's going on in the world, I think life just feels like too much sometimes. You know, we sit down to watch the evening news, and we leave depressed because J.D. Vance talked about Scotland. Like, I just never thought that would happen. Anyway, I was warned not to do politics this week. I got in trouble for it last week, so we're going to move on. And so Sabbath meets us in the realities of all those life is too busy, life is fast, life is too much moments. But I also want to recognize that as soon as I've mentioned the subject Sabbath, for some people in the room already, you feel anxious because you have a legacy that says this is legalism, or it becomes something that is profoundly unhelpful and causes you problems. And I recognize that in Scotland that's been a reality. There's a history of that view of Sabbath. That it's somehow a big long list of do's and do nots. My notes auto-corrected do nots to donuts. Now, I do think Sabbath would be much more interesting if it was a list of do's and donuts, but anyway. I want us to hear that Sabbath is a gift, not a burden, a grace, not a law. We need to hold that as we go through all of this. So why Sabbath? Well, we need it in our culture, as I've said. So many of us are existing in places of exhaustion. And some of that is because our culture values us for what we produce. We are useful insofar as we are productive. We can see that in lots of different areas of culture. I think in the assisted dying debate at the moment, one of the things that if you listen carefully, you can hear is that, well, people are beyond their sell-by date, really. There's no useful purpose to their life. They can't produce anything for us. It's profoundly unhelpful. There are lots and lots of ways in which we are seen as just producers. And our whole culture is built around that. The idols of our culture, productivity, achievement, accomplishment. We must always be striving for more, to accumulate. And even Sabbath itself is being leveraged by some in this way. Because we see that people saying things like, well, make sure you take a day off, have a day of rest, because you'll be more productive in the other days. Now, that might actually be true, but the heart of that is profoundly worrying. Because it says, I want to make Sabbath something utilitarian, something useful, so that you will be more productive for someone else at some point in the future. We've got to be careful we don't fall into that trap. I want us to see, in fact, more than I want us to see, I want to see that Sabbath is subversive. It undercuts everything the world drives towards, all of our idols. And so Sabbath, this place of rest, becomes a glimpse for us of our hoped-for future rest. We've talked about it lots in this church, that there is this great narrative arc of Scripture that begins with God's creation, and we're going to look at that this morning. It begins with God's good creation, and then we have the fall and the breaking down of that, and then we see that God works through Abraham and Israel to bring redemption, finds its fulfillment in Jesus and his death and his resurrection, and the new hope that we have. And then we see that there's a new creation. Heaven comes to earth in the picture we see in Revelation, and we will enter rest. And this is our great future hope that we get to feel now. And both that future hope and that present reality contain two important ideas in Sabbath. The first is the idea of rest, ceasing from labor. The idea of Shabbat in the Hebrew language, just to rest, to cease from labor, to stop doing things. But there's more to it than that. There's also this other idea of settledness, belonging somewhere, being in one place. And so we can see how that's true in the future, right? That obviously we have this settled place in the new heavens and the new earth. But it's profoundly clear, I think, in the New Testament that Jesus comes to offer us this settled place of belonging. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Not only is it a ceasing from labor, it's a place of belonging. And so as we talk about Sabbath today, I want us to hold those two important ideas. It's not just about the ceasing of rest, but it's also about the belonging in a place. We have to hold them together. So how I want to look at this morning, we're going to look at three biblical texts. There are dozens and dozens we could look at, but I want us to look at Genesis 2, Exodus 20, and Mark chapter 2. So, let's begin. Genesis chapter 2. Right at the beginning of the Bible. So we've got Genesis 1, this great creation narrative telling us all the things that have happened on each of the days of the creation. And then we get to the beginning of chapter 2, and it says this. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. An amazing little passage. This whole seventh day that exists. God rested. And it's interesting because presumably God didn't need to rest, right? If we have an all-powerful God, it's not like he suddenly in creation came to the end of himself and collapsed and went, whoa, I need a day off. Presumably it was a choice because it was good to rest. It was good to do so. So first of all, God rested. A good thing to do. But the other thing that happens is that God declares that as he rests, he blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Now, nothing else in Genesis 1 and 2 is called holy. Lots of things are called good, and as we've said before, some things are even called exceedingly good. Mr. Kipling-like. But it's only the Sabbath that is declared holy. Now that should give us pause. That should make us sit up and go, oh, there's something about this. Why is the Sabbath holy? What is it that makes the Sabbath holy? I've wrestled with this all week. I don't really have a very good answer for you, is the honest truth. But here's my best attempt. The Sabbath is holy because God made it so. Because it was a gift to humanity. It's not holy because he said, I'm going to keep it for myself. And why do I think that? Because do you remember what God did on day 6? He made humanity. And so humans' first full day on earth is the day of rest, the place of Sabbath, the one place that God has called holy. We have a daily rhythm of rest, right? We go to bed, we sleep, we close our eyes, some of us easily, others it's a problem, but if we're healthy and everything's functioning well with our lives, we get to go to bed or go wherever we lay our heads, we go to sleep and we wake up in the morning. And that habit we think of often as the end of our day, right? It's like, well, after I've done my day's work, I go to sleep and I rest. But actually, in Genesis, the narrative, there was evening and morning, and then we have the day. And so there's an idea that we begin our day with going to bed. We begin our day in sleep, in complete surrender to God. Because you have no control over your life when you go to sleep. Like you have some control while you're awake, where I'm going to sleep, how, what the room temperature is going to be, all these kinds of things. Am I going to have a white noise machine in the room, or any of these things we can do? But once you go to sleep, it is our most vulnerable state. And we begin our day there, in this place of sleep. And then now we get to come into this place of life and hope. And in the Genesis category here, we now have day 7, which is the holy place, the place that we are able to inhabit, set aside for us, and we'll say more about that. We're going to talk more about sleep and Sabbath next week as we come to what the practicalities of this are. So Genesis 2, God rested because it was good to do so. Sabbath is set aside as holy, and it became the primary state of humanity. The first day is into the day of rest. Exodus 20. Moses goes up the mountain, comes down with the commandments. The 10 Commandments. Let's just quickly, we're going to run through these quickly. I forgot to pay attention to what time it was when I got up. That's always a bad idea. Anyway. Commandment 1. You'll have no other gods before me, right? Okay. Pretty straightforward. Don't go making images of me, says God. Don't misuse the name of the Lord. The fourth one, remember the Sabbath day. We'll come back to that. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor, and don't covet your neighbor's stuff. They all seem pretty sensible, don't they? They are what they are. They're good laws. Someone else that was talking about this said this. He said, he was also a pastor. He said, look, for most of these, if I break them, I might lose my job as a pastor. You know, if I steal from the church, I will probably lose my job. If I commit adultery, I will lose my job. If I murder someone, I will almost certainly lose my job. And he said this, he said, however, if I work on the Sabbath, if I work 7 days a week, I will quite possibly get a raise. There's another story of a conference that was being done, and they were talking about pastors managing their workload, and one pastor in all seriousness said, if God had wanted me to take a rest, he would have given me an extra day in the week. Okay. A.J. Svodpa says, we see these not so much as 10 commandments, but as 9 commandments and one strong suggestion. What does our text tell us here about the Sabbath? Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. So what's this telling us? Well, first of all, it's the only one of the commandments that begins by saying, remember. I wonder if God knew that it would be an easy thing for us to forget, to put aside. But remembering is also an active thing. It's not just this passive kind of like, I remember that once, one day, in a many moons ago, I took a Sabbath. Or God said there should be a Sabbath. It's an active thing. It's a remembering of God has said. There is something for us to live into here. And so we are to remember, and I think this is where the church is important. Because if any of these disciplines we talked about last week, and this is one of them, the challenge becomes if we try and do them on our own, then we're so tempted towards legalism and towards this sense of, I can do this. I am going to be a better person. I will be a better person than Nick because I'm going to take a Sabbath this week and Nick won't have a Sabbath and he's a bad person. I know we never verbalize this, right? But we know our hearts are horrible and we do this. And so the joy of gathering together on the Lord's day is that we remind ourselves, we remember together Sabbath. We remember together that the Lord said there is a day of rest. And so the church community helps us with that. Remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. So holy is this idea of separateness, otherness. And it's really important for us. But we get to keep it holy. Right? We get to actually practice things that allow us to keep this day holy. What does that mean? Next week's sermon, all about how we do this in practice. But we maintain the purity of the Sabbath, the holiness of the Sabbath, by our actions and our posture. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we have time set aside and we use it as a space for worship. We use it as a space for enjoying all the goodness of God's creation. So I am not saying you should go home, you come to church, and then once you've been to church, you can go home and you must sit, and there's no cooking to be done, there's no joy to be had, there's no fun to be had, there's no games to be had. You must just sit there and keep it holy by being miserable, because that's what God likes. I love the movie Chariots of Fire, but there's this one little bit where he comes out of church after Sunday morning, and there's two wee boys playing football, and they say, will you play with us? Will you play with us? And he says, not today, lads. It's the Sabbath. I'm like, oh, no, man. We keep it holy by our posture, by the way that we live into it. We keep it holy by finding the joy that God has in it. We keep it holy by recognizing the God who has set aside this day for our rest. And it's a Sabbath to the Lord, it says in Exodus. This is why we worship, right? Because it's our posture. This is why a Sabbath in the church is different than a Sabbath that's there so that we can be more productive in the rest of the week. This isn't for my benefit. It's a Sabbath to the Lord. I'm going to rest up and worship. I'm going to recognize the God that has given me this day by enjoying all the good things that he has for us. And then there's this brilliant little bit here where God then gives all these directions on it. You shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. It's interesting that wives are not included in that list. So Karen, you can go to work. And no, there's something really lovely about this, right? So I think there's two things that strike me. One, it means that we cannot get out of our requirement to rest by telling other people to do the work. Right? There's no getting around it by saying, well, I have to rest, but I could have my son or my daughter go and do the things that matter in our farm or whatever it happens to be. I mean, there's loads of farmers in our church, of course, so it's a brilliant example. But in an agrarian culture such as this, the idea that you would not harvest in a particular day was a real problem. But we were to keep it holy and separate. It's for everyone. It's for everyone. And I think in our current culture, that's very difficult for us to attain. Okay? We have no power to tell Tesco to shut on Sunday here, right? Like, good luck with that one, it's fine. But I do think it then becomes incumbent on us, if we genuinely believe that Sabbath is subversive, if our faith is undercutting the things of the world, then how will we choose to live in that space? Are we going to force others to work in order that we can get what we need? Now, this is where we'll talk more about these practicalities next week, but we have a Tesco delivery arriving today, which I realized this morning as I finished up my sermon notes. And it's apparently a click and collect, that makes it better. So how do we, I guess the reason I'm saying that is I want us to realize this is complicated, okay? And yet I don't want to abandon the idea that choosing to live a Sabbatarian kind of life, the one that is driven in this kind of rhythm, that absolutely undercuts what the world says matters. And it's not for me to cause others to work on that day. We'll come back to that next week. So if you're a visitor, sorry, you're just going to have to figure that out yourself, or you can find it later on Zoom or YouTube. But we'll come back to that one. But ultimately, I think we're not supposed to use others to get around our rest. We're not supposed to cause them to have to work so that we can have what we want. And one of the Jewish writers I was reading as I prepared this week, what was really interesting is they prepare for Sabbath. So they know that they can't cook, or if you're an Orthodox Jew, you can't cook on Sabbath, you can't use electricity, there's all sorts of things you can't do because they're trying to live this way. I'm not advocating that we do that, but one of the really beautiful things that comes out of that is the preparation they have to do for Sabbath. So in order to keep this day holy, they make preparations through the week, so the food will be prepared the day before Sabbath so that it's ready and available for them to heat. And they have even invented these little warming plates that they put stuff on that allows them to keep it warm which means they don't have to break the Sabbath by turning things on and cooking and stuff. Now, it becomes very legalistic, and that's not the burden on us. Again, we go back, this is gift, not burden. But there's something beautiful about how much it orders the rest of the week, because they begin to think about, how do I prepare myself for Sabbath? That would be gift to us, I think. And then I want us to see the breadth of Sabbath. This is the last bit on Exodus 20. I had never noticed this until this week, but it says here, as we go through those list of people, male or female servants, not your animals, or any foreigner residing in your towns. Not your animals. I was like, you all know how much I love animals and pets and stuff like that. Your pets get a Sabbath. Your animals have a Sabbath. That's the idea. It's for everyone. And in actual fact, it's for everything. Because if we look in Leviticus 25, God even commands rest for the land. Every 7th year it's to lay fallow. And so Sabbath is holy, it's other, and it's all-encompassing. Now we just have to choose how we're going to enter that as those who would follow Jesus. And so to our third and final text, Mark chapter 2. Jesus is out on the Sabbath, and he's walking through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they picked up some heads of grain to eat. And the Pharisees appear, and they say, what are they doing? Is it unlawful? Jesus then has this slightly obscure conversation with them about David breaking the law to take the food that was set aside for the high priest. And then we get this. And then Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Sabbath is a gift from God. It is not that we were made to keep this holy day. It's that a holy day was made for us. That's how it works. It invites us into a place where we can rest in belonging and in ceasing from labor. And it's a Sabbath of which Jesus is Lord. This matters because he is Lord, not me. Many of you will know that I'm going on sabbatical later this year. And I'll be honest, I'm nervous about it for any number of reasons. But one of them is this. Moses went away up the mountain, and then he came back down, And all these lovely people that he'd been leading had gathered together all their gold and they'd built a giant golden calf. And I'm worried about golden calves. I'm not really. Well, I am, but the reality is that I'm probably more worried I'll go away and I'll come back and you'll all be exactly the same, serving Jesus in the community, worshiping him together, and enjoying him. That actually, I don't matter that much. That I am actually not in control. That things work perfectly well without me. And every pastor who's ever gone on sabbatical feels exactly the same, or they're not telling you the truth. It's one of the reasons we do this, because it reminds us of who is in control. And in smaller ways, our ceasing from labor on the weekends does exactly the same thing. It says, I recognize that if I rest, the world will not fall apart. That if I stop my labor, if I don't answer my emails for one 24-hour period in a week, if I don't show up in my workplace one day a week, it'll all still be okay. Because do you know what? My labor doesn't matter that much. Now, that is not to say you don't matter. You matter profoundly to God. But we matter profoundly to God, not because of what we do, but because of who we are, which is why the invitation to rest is the invitation to see God and to recognize the proper order of things. He is the Lord. I am not. He is in control. I am not. And so Sabbath becomes this gift to see ourselves fully, to recognize that while what we do might be important, and there are many of you in this room who have really important roles, but we are not defined by that. And we can also put it in proper context, which is to say, even those of us with the most important roles, we can rest for a day. The world will still spin on its axis. Things will still happen. So Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. And then finally this. I think the joy of him reordering for the Pharisees their understanding of Sabbath is the gift to us that Sabbath becomes something that is not to be slavishly adhered to, i.e. no picking little bits of corn when you're hungry, but it's an opportunity for human flourishing and enjoying the goodness of God's creation. And so, to finish, we're to be a people at rest, and from there we then go into service of the world. John Mark Comer says, Sabbath is an entire day of your week, 1/7 of your life, set aside to not only stop and rest, but also delight in and worship the God who made you to be with himself. It's a day to cultivate joy in a world of sadness. A day to cultivate joy in a world of sadness. Sabbath is not to be avoided or ignored or been afraid of, but rather it's to be embraced for us. Sabbath is not a commandment that we are bound to, but rather a promise we're invited to enjoy. I said this at the beginning. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He brings us a place of belonging in himself and a place where we can lay down our labors. This is true Sabbath, where one day we'll see that in full. But for now, we get to practice it as a discipline and a gift that can help us to flourish and enjoy the goodness of God's creation. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for your goodness to us. We thank you that you have gifted us Sabbath. And as we wrestle with what it means, and then particularly as we think through this week what our practical lives might look like, and as we wrestle with that together next week, Lord, would you lead us? But Lord, above all, I pray that we would hear today something of your kindness towards us, something of your grace that says we are not valued for what we do. We're not valuable to you for the works that we can do. But we are loved by you because we are made in your image and that we are found in your Son, Jesus Christ. Spirit, would you minister to us the love of the Father? That place of belonging that we can experience in the here and now. And may we live lives this week that are grateful for your gift of Sabbath. Amen.